Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. For 17 years, Jim and Doris Saunders owned and operated Saunders Sausage Shop in South College Station. Since they sold that business in 1983, they've enjoyed retirement, much of it viewed out the window of their well-traveled RV. Jim and Doris met after his World War II service in the 1st Cavalry F Troop. It's stationed in the Philippines near war's end. He was on one of the ships at Tokyo Bay, September 2nd, 1945, when the peace treaty was signed on the USS Missouri, and it was his band of brothers in F Troop that served as General Douglas MacArthur's honor guard on his march into Tokyo 6 days later, September 8th. Please welcome World War II veteran Jim Saunders to Veterans of the Valley. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for your service. You were drafted in 1944 into the Army. You were living in Wisconsin then. Sort of take us from there. I think you went down to what then was called Camp Hood. It's now Fort Hood for your basic training. Sort of take us from there.
Well, I was in Camp Hood until I completed my basic training. At that time, we had an eight weeks course before you're shipped overseas. But I got sick the last week or so while I was on bivouac, and I had to go in the hospital. And so then they assigned me to another troop when I got out, and another outfit, and they were all Puerto Ricans. Mm-hmm. And of course, I asked a few of them to speak English so I could understand them.
Right.
And which they did. They were pretty good. But they were all shipped out. I don't know where they went to or anything like that after we completed our training.
Right.
I went home for I think 7 days, and there I left. I went to Fort Ord, California, on a troop train. And waited there until my orders to go overseas.
Right.
And I left, I think it was April the 6th of 45, to go overseas.
Right.
And on the way over, I know President Roosevelt died. And of course, then President Truman
right.
Came in.
What was the communication like back then? Were you all made aware of President Roosevelt's death? I mean, fairly quickly?
Yeah, the Navy announced it
right.
on board ship there.
Right.
I don't know how they got their communications, but they got it through probably CW or something like that.
Right. You were on the USS Sturgis, and
right.
It wasn't a bad ship. You sort of blended in with the Navy, right?
That was a Navy ship. And we had 3 meals a day, and we were treated real nice all the way over. And but I slept on board the ship on the flat steel deck, right behind one of those 17-inch guns. It took us 31 days to cross.
Right.
And I think I slept about 28 on the steel there. And one time they were going to do a little target practice, and they shot those guns off, and I think I went about 3 foot in the air. And I still have a habit of doing that.
They didn't give you much warning, huh?
No, there's no warning whatsoever. But they were shooting at, I think, a weather balloon.
Right.
And but we went to New Guinea first, and we left there 24 hours or 72 hours later. Mm-hmm. And when I woke up, there was hundreds and hundreds of ships around, and it was a convoy, and we were going down to the Philippines,
right.
which wasn't too far, but I guess at that time when they went in a pack like that, they felt more safety.
You told me that instead of sitting around, you were the volunteering type, and you volunteered transport some 50-gallon drums with a couple of other guys loaded
Yeah.
on some 6x6s, and that was a memorable trip.
Yeah, I'll remember that because that's when I got shot at, and I never had a rifle to shoot back,
Right.
but I did jump out of the truck, run down the road, and waited for him to turn around, and he come down and picked us up, and we went back to camp. And that was at our Repel Depot.
Right.
That was before we were assigned to an outfit.
Right. Then you tell me the driver admitted that he'd gotten lost.
Yeah,
It was dark, right?
It was dark,
Yeah.
and he was just come up to this bridge, and it was blowed out,
Uh-huh.
and he didn't know where he was at, and the lieutenant that was showing us the way, he didn't know where he was at. But anyways, we got back, and it was just a few days later I got shipped to the 1st Cavalry Division.
Right.
Went to the F Group.
Right.
And there, they were in the process of making a rest camp in a jungle area, but it was a coconut grove. But in 4 years' time, it had grown up like a jungle,
Mm-hmm.
and they were in there cleaning that out and all that. I didn't say anything yesterday about helping to move some of these big boulders that they had. They dug a hole down on both sides, and they're going to throw a chain down there and yank the boulder out. So they threw the chain down there, and of course I volunteered to reach down there and get the chain. And when I pulled the chain up, I had ants all over my arm,
Oh, my goodness.
and I got blood poison. And so I went to sick call, and they gave me a shot and told me not to do that again.
They needed some cook's helpers, evidently, and that's
Yeah,
something else that you
and
volunteered
that's,
for. Right?
It wasn't very long after that I volunteered to be a cook's helper.
Right.
And we got 1 day on and 2 days off. And of course, the time that we were off, we could go any place. We could pretty well travel, right close by, but not too far, because the Japanese was coming down to the place where our Filipinos were washing our clothes,
Mm-hmm.
and they would either cut an arm off or something like that for their lunch. And they resorted to cannibalism
Right.
at that time of the war.
I see.
And these were stragglers that's never been captured or anything like that, and so that put us on alert all the time. Then we went out for amphibious training
Mm-hmm.
in Subic Bay, and that's when we were out training. That's when we heard that they dropped the atomic bomb. Of course, at that time they called it like a blockbuster, because we couldn't understand what an atomic bomb would even do.
Right.
And they'd start telling us what it done, and it was just unbelievable.
Sure.
So, and it was just a couple days later, they said, well, the war was over and everything like that. Well, we got off. When we heard that, we were out on a training course. We would go out to the island on the landing craft.
Mm-hmm.
Go train a little bit, and then come back and go back to the ship.
Right.
And
Right.
some of these veterans that were a lot older than me and been in the war for 3-4 years, they had their rifles. They threw them in the river, not in the river, but in the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
in the Subic Bay. They said, well, it's over. We ain't going to need it. so, well, as far as I know, they didn't get reprimanded for it or anything like that. But
Your amphibious training, obviously, that was training
That was
for what
for-
was
for-
supposed to be a ground war in Japan.
for the landing that was scheduled for October 1st, in Japan.
Right,
And,
right, for what would have been a ground war that
Yeah.
no one was looking forward to.
They,
obviously.
the Japanese were pretty well fortified.
Right,
They had tunnels built, and they had ammunition, and everything was close by.
right.
And I was amazed at some of the trenches that they had, how well they were.
Yeah. Well, the Marines at Iwo Jima could tell you that
Yeah,
story. That's obviously they were well fortified.
Yeah.
But when the bomb did drop, you're saying that you didn't really understand at the time that was something that would end the war, or the reason
No,
that President
because
Truman did it.
we've heard of, they would, during basic training, they would read the paper to us, the whole troop, and would talk about blockbusters.
Mm-hmm.
Blockbusters over in England. And when they talked about how many blockbusters this atomic bomb was, it was just kind of unrealistic.
Right.
When we got to Japan, we went to the, at first we was in tents
Mm-hmm.
until we went to the Navy barracks. But everything around the Navy barracks was bombed out. It was pinpoint bombing by the Air Force. What do you call it? The
Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps at
Right.
the time.
Uh-huh.
And that was amazing to get lost in Yokohama there.
Right.
And but
You ended up. Oh, I want you to tell me. You talked about when you were on the ship to Japan, you ran into the typhoon. So
Right,
even though
yeah.
the war was over, your biggest danger was ahead of you,
Right.
fighting that typhoon, right?
we got out for a day, and then we were ordered to come back into Subic Bay for 72 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed there 24 and took out again, and that's when we hit that high water. I mean, that water was rough, and it's the closest thing I got to being seasick.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you could, the propellers would come out of the ship and just vibrate the whole ship.
Wow.
And you kind of wonder what all those nuts and bolts are going to be able to withstand it, but they did. They withstand it.
But instead of fighting the ground war, you found yourself as part of the occupation forces
Right, then-
for Japan and Tokyo Bay, 2 September 1945. Talk about that experience of being there in the bay where the treaty was signed.
That's where we had 1,000 airplanes come over. It was just like a cloud. I think they were B-17s.
Right.
And it was just like a cloud that overshadowed the thing. We weren't that close to the USS Missouri, but we unloaded at that time in Yokohama,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we put up for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where the Navy barracks was,
Right.
and of course I experienced the number of earthquakes that they have in Japan at the
Right.
time. It was kind of jittery, but I mean, nothing would fall down. It would just shake,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
so.
And 6 days later, F Troop had earned the honor to be the honor guard for General MacArthur as he marched into Tokyo on 8 September 1945. And matter of fact, there's a little song that goes with that. What is it?
Many may go and many, let's see, many may come and many may go, but we were first in Tokyo. So,
That you all sang proudly.
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's they have it on a billboard
Right.
in the First Cavalry Division there. So
Right.
I don't know if they still got it or not, but
General MacArthur had the reputation of he never saw a camera that he didn't like, and so
No.
obviously there was a.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that day and sort of the pageantry of that day of marching into Tokyo?
Well, prior to that, for a few days, we was on a drill field in marching, and we were competing against other troops, other battalions and all that. So
Right.
it was kind of tiring.
Sure.
But after that, we did get a certificate saying that we were first in Tokyo,
Wow.
signed by Major Bell
Right.
from 1st Cavalry Division.
Right.
And General Chase was our commanding general.
Right.
And I think he's still living in Houston.
Is that right? You were one of the jobs as part of the occupation in Tokyo is you were in charge of securing one of the bigger banks. In
Right,
Tokyo,
right. Our troop was in charge of guarding the bank and also around the Imperial headquarters. They had troops based around there. I didn't stay in there very long because it came that I was going to get out with points, and they came back with a re-enlistment program because right at that time I was in the United States Army, and Army of the United States, I should say, and it came that you could re-enlist and go in the United States Army and retain your same rank,
Right.
be a permanent rank. So that sounded pretty good. So I went re-enlisted for 18 more months, figuring that I would stay in Japan, and it was just a short time, 3-4 weeks, and I was on my way back to the States. And that 18 months went by real fast because I went to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and I took a 66-day leave of absence and went to Fort Sheridan.
Right.
Then from Fort Sheridan, I went to Fort Riley.
Right.
I kind of shuddered about that because I figured I'd have to ride a horse, and of course I'm not, although I was pretty well born and raised on a farm, I still didn't want to ride a horse.
But you didn't have to ride a horse. Instead, they sent you to radio school, right?
Yeah, it was all mechanized. It was a mechanized reconnaissance deal in Fort Riley. So when I got there, well, it wasn't very long. I come back from a 3-day furlough, a 3-day pass, and the first sergeant wanted to know what if I knew how to operate a radio. I said, well, I know how to turn them on and off. And it's good. He says, yeah, you go to radio school. So he assigned me to the radio school. So I went there and I spent, I think it was 8 or 9 weeks of radio school. That's when they just slapped the earphones on you, and you'd hear the CW come across continuous wave sounds, and you'd pick out what you know. Well, I've always known that the 3 dits and 3 dots is SOS.
Right.
And so eventually I learned the Morse code and was able to send it on a bug.
Right.
So I graduated from there, and then I went to radio repair. There we had to build a 5-tube super heterodyne receiver, and also being able to test radio units and try to figure out what's wrong with them and all that, and repair. So I did that, got a job as an instructor in the Department of Communications. All this time, my re-enlistment was coming up, And the last 13 days I spent in the Army was they shipped me down to Camp Function or Forsyth out of Fort Riley to be a cook. I was down there the first night I was down there all by myself. Nobody was down there except me, so I had no way of protection. I didn't have any vehicle, and so the only thing I had the next day, I told him that I didn't like it. He said, "Well, that's what you'll have to do." I said, "No, I'm going into town tonight." So I walked into Junction City,
Right.
got myself a hotel. Next day, I hitchhike out back to camp. But then my enlistment came up to re-enlist again, and I took my time about that.
Yeah.
But I got my discharge, and I stayed around Junction City for 30 days, debating amongst myself whether or not to go back in,
Right.
and whether or not I had 2 lieutenant colonels. One wants me one there, one wants me there.
Right.
And I just kind of shoved it. I said, "Well, I just think I'll go home." But I made up my mind that I was going to retire
Right.
within 20 years,
Right.
and which I pretty well did.
Yes, sir.
In what way? My wife tell you, I've already retired 3-4 times. So
You and your wife Doris were married in 1957 after you
Right.
got back from the war. But I want you to tell a story real quick. You went back to Wisconsin. You had bought a car that a fella took without asking and wrecked it.
right, and that was when I was in Fort Riley, Kansas,
Right.
and he wrecked it. So he gave me some money, and I went and bought what they call at that time a Wizard. A Wizard was a bicycle with a Maytag wash machine motor on it.
Yeah.
And so
Not a real sophisticated form
no,
of
not real,
transportation.
but that was the going thing at that time.
Right.
In 1947.
Sure.
So I decided I'd go home. My home was about 600 miles from Fort Riley.
Yeah.
So it cost me $1.95 for gas and oil to go there.
And you said that thing would get up to 30, 35 miles an hour.
It would go 25, 30 miles an hour just on a straightaway, and then you go downhill, you can go 50. But
And this was in July, so it wasn't necessarily a weather problem.
No,
so.
I didn't have any weather. I could pull alongside a bar ditch and go to sleep.
You were 21 years old at this time, and you were out of the service, and then you worked a lot of different jobs. You worked on a farm, I guess, with your dad for a while. You unloaded lumber from boxcars for, you told me, 75 cents an hour. You delivered 7-Ups for a penny a case.
Yeah.
You know,
And so much a week.
and so much a week. Worked at a service station as a mechanic, and then you ran your own service station
Right.
for a while, right?
Right.
Sort of take us after that. You went to work in North Chicago, and sort of take us on your career before you got into the trucking business,
Yeah,
the truck driving business.
I worked in Chicago at a metallurgical.
Selenium rectifiers.
Selenium
right.
rectifiers
Right,
as a more of an inspector.
right,
So, with the background I had in the Army on radio repair, give me the training that I needed for to take that job. And then I left there and went back, helped my dad on the farm. I stayed there several years, and then I went trucking business
right,
with my brother, 2-man operation from Chicago to New York City. I worked there with him for about 6 months, and truck broke down, and the company wanted me to drive truck for them, which I did, and I was there about a month, and then they offered me a job as a supervisor for hiring and training drivers, which I did.
Right. And this was a, go ahead.
For 13 years, I
Right.
did
This
that.
was a trucking company that was actually sort of hired to the Jewel T Company.
Right. They would, the Jewel T Company would hire drivers out of Rentar, Car Lines, and Leasing Company.
Right.
And which is all right.
And one of your jobs, I think you said that a driver in Houston had gotten injured, and you had to go down and hire a new driver, and you met an office manager with Jewel T named Doris, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I was stationed there just a little longer than what I usually do. They usually send me into some place, and I'm usually there a week or two, and that's it. But I was there in Houston for almost 6 weeks.
Right.
When I got done, I was engaged.
6 weeks will do that to
Yeah.
you. You married Doris, I think you said 1957.
Right.
So y'all have been married now some 52 years.
52 years.
And you finally came to Texas. You said the grass was greener, a little greener in Texas. You were in Carlos for a while and started raising hogs, and that sort of led you into the sausage shop. Is that right?
No. My brother-in-law, Doris's brother, had the sausage shop and the hog farm there.
Right.
And he went to teach helicopter pilots in the Vietnam War.
Right.
And so he offered me a deal to come down and take over the operation.
I see.
So I said, sure, I'll do that.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
We're out of time. I wish we could talk more, but you had the sausage shop, and of course you and Doris give an awful lot of time to the VFW here locally, 4692, and we're out of time, but I want to thank you for your service.
Sure.
All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah.
Thank you. Jim Saunders didn't start out in Texas, but after his 3 years in the Army and his World War II service, he brought his wife, Doris, back to the Brazos Valley, where they worked hard, and now they enjoy their well-deserved retirement. We thank them for their service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.